least closer to it.
Good enough, Alex. Let's
Good?
talk about
You guys all good? Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a beautiful, sunny Syracuse day for the first time in a long time. And also let me begin by just saying a happy Dolphy Day to our friends at Lemoyne and all those who celebrate. So, I'm Alex Marion, and I'm the Syracuse City Auditor, and I'm really excited to be here today to share with all of you my latest report. It is called Budget Balancing Act, and this is the first time a city auditor's office has reviewed a mayor's budget proposal before it's enacted. And I'm really excited about this. I'm really proud of the work that my team put into making this happen. I think that this will provide a very thorough and thoughtful understanding of the budget in terms that average Syracusans will understand, and I really hope it proves to be a useful tool not only to members of our Common Council as they go through their budget discussions this year, but also to members of the public. And speaking of members of the public, I want to encourage folks to come to the Common Council's budget hearing, which this year is on Tuesday, April 29th, 5:30 p.m. here at City Hall. It's a great opportunity to have your voices heard as part of the budget process. I also want to share with you something we are releasing for the first time as well, because today's a big day of firsts. In addition to our report, we are putting out a workbook of the Syracuse City budget. And this is the first time that, or at least the first time I am aware of, that there is going to be a machine-readable version of the budget. For those familiar with it, it's kind of a clunky PDF, but now there will be a machine-readable Excel file that will be available on my office's website for folks to download, look at budget detail, and included as part of that, we are putting in 5 years of prior actual numbers so you can see exactly how much is being raised on revenue lines or being spent on revenue lines. And just as a little example of what that looks like, we have right here the printed version of the general fund. So you can see just exactly how many different lines and all the different information you can get right through our website now and be able to check that out. This is going to be a great resource, and I encourage folks, whether they are data experts or data amateurs, to spend some time checking it out and learning a little bit more about the detail inside the city budget. So let's get to what's in the meat of our report. So this report lays out our findings and a handful of recommendations on this year's budget proposal. We also offer updates on the recommendations we included last year in our analysis of the enacted budget. In this year's budget on the revenue side, there's a 2% property tax increase and a record-setting levy of $61 million. That is the highest levy in City of Syracuse history. The tax increase would add about $85 a year to the tax bill of a house assessed at $150,000. This also includes a 2% water rate increase. We will also be using $27 million in reserve funding. Just under 8% of the total budget will be made up by reserve dollars. This is not the highest percentage of reserve funding ever included in the city budget, but it is the highest dollar amount, and it represents about 22% of the current reserve fund, which sits at about $120 million. And let's be clear, we can make this transfer this year. We can make this transfer next year. But we will not be able to make a transfer like this every year going forward. At $348 million, the budget represents one of the highest expense lines that the city of Syracuse has ever had. It is important to remember that many of the expenses, like pension costs, are outside of our control, and we have limited ability to do something about those expenses. I continue to also be concerned with a challenging and ever-changing environment that relates to federal aid and tariffs, which will increase our costs and expenses along the way even further. One concern raised in this report, and a recommendation that I encourage the city to follow, is to do better multi-year budget planning. This budget, and what you will see on our workbook, includes a number of areas where revenues and expenses do not seem tied to trend lines for prior years. Our workbook that we put out will show 5 years of prior actual expenses. And I would strongly encourage budget decision makers to use really conservative estimates based on prior year trend lines. That's the best way to figure out where we are going forward for both revenues and expenses. Another recommendation we offer is that the city defray some of its borrowing. I do not want to encourage deferred maintenance because that winds up costing more money down the road, but I believe in the current interest rate environment, we need to be cautious about what we borrow. We should only be borrowing for expenses that we know are definitely going to happen and that we have solid estimates for. We should keep those borrowing costs as tight as possible. I'm also recommending in the budget documents a clear presentation of the city's fund balance. And let's also include the reserve funds for our other funds, the water fund, the sewer fund, the sidewalk fund, so that everyone can understand, as we are making really difficult choices about revenue coming out of the fund balance, what we can do to how those funds are doing and how we are interacting with them. Look, this is a challenging budget year, and I do respect the mayor's efforts to make lemonade out of some lemons. I support strongly efforts that the city is considering right now to do a reevaluation of our property taxes for individual properties. I think that would be a good long-term investment on how the city can generate revenue, and I encourage the council to vote on that in short order. And I'll be clear, we need to make strides on creating more efficiency in city government. I'm ready to work with my colleagues to make that possible. But to be an employer of choice and meet the ever-expanding portfolio of local government, we need to talk about ways to increase our revenue. Numerous times, I have called for improvements to how the city generates revenue, generates income for itself, through improved permit and license fee structures, transforming our approach to street parking and parking garages, leveraging our code enforcement operations. These are smart tools, and many of them already exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to re-innovate something. Many of these exist and simply need a modern take on them or increasing some of the fees that we are leveraging. Also, since being in this office, I have fought for, successfully, increases in state aid. $5 million now 2 years in a row. But it's critical to say that New York State needs to step up to do even more to address our tax-exempt property crisis. State-owned facilities and large nonprofit institutions do not pay property taxes. Less than half of the property in the city of Syracuse pays property taxes. We receive over $79 million in state aid, which is great, but we need our partners in New York State to step up and do more so that we can have the revenue needed to provide everyone with the essential public services that they need and deserve. And that's partly why earlier this year I joined with Senator Chris Ryan to call for a commission to study the redesign of the AIM formula, which is the driest thing you can possibly imagine, but it's very necessary. It is the formula that awards dollars to localities that has not been updated in well over a decade. We need a new formula that recognizes the ever-changing nature of what city governments do, and we need to make sure that that formula exists and is vibrant and is useful going forward. I am hopeful that New York State will include that in their budget this year. And I'll just conclude with this. We cannot cut our way to prosperity. That's not going to happen. But something we need to take efforts at greater change to make the city of Syracuse sustainable for years to come. And I look forward to working with my colleagues in government to help make some of those changes happen, and I hope this report is a good launching point for a lot of those changes. So with that, happy to take any questions you might have.
So is the main argument or piece of information that you're looking to convey here today is that this budget for this year works, but we need to look at new ways to formulate the budget because this isn't going to be sustainable
You say that very well, Connor. You may have a future in this business. Yes, I think this year's budget has a lot of tough requests in it. We are asking, the city of Syracuse is asking for more from an ever-shrinking number of taxpayers, and we need to be very mindful and cognizant of what those trend lines look like going forward. We may not have the resources long-term to sustain a $350 million city, but we need to, number one, make sure our own house is in order. Let's find efficiencies. Let's find ways to raise revenue in the areas we can control, like permits, like license fees, like many of those other issues that I've talked about in this office and others have looked at in our community. I think there are interesting ways we can look at different ways to do taxation. But additionally, we need our partners in state government to step up. That is where we're going to find the most either regulatory relief or access to direct aid. They have a number of choices at their disposal. We need them to start picking some of those options and doing more with them.
Changing the fees and whatnot, is that really going to make a lot of money or enough money to really make a dent in revenue shortages?
Every dollar counts. Everything makes a difference. Here's a great example. I did an audit of license fees that came out last summer. And in that audit, we found that the City of Syracuse licensing operation generated about $40,000 in revenue a year. That is less than it pays the person to sit at the desk to collect license fees. We could either just license nothing and save money on not having that person sit at that desk, or we could find better ways to either increase some of those fees, not in a way that breaks the bank for folks, but in ways that just make them modern and straightforward and are licensing things that are important to have licensed today. Or, and I believe if we do that, we could be generating $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 of additional revenue a year. We're not going to solve our budget situation in one fell swoop. If there was a $30 million solution sitting out there, we would have done it already. It would make sense to do that already. The only solution like that that's available is through the state of New York. If they have that kind of support or regulatory relief they want to assist us with. So what we're going to have to do is go through line by line, go through the big spreadsheet, and say, where can we find something we can cut a little bit? Where's something we can, with a little more effort, a little more thoughtful execution, we can raise a little bit. You're not going to solve our budget situation in 8-figure numbers. You're going to solve it in 6- and 7-figure numbers repeatedly. And that's just the hard work of being in government right now.
You talked about supporting the revaluation program. Some of the counselors have been making statements that indicate they may not be supporting that. Talking about how they see it as a thing that will increase taxes even more. Can you explain your thinking about A, whether that's an accurate description of what a valuation does, and B, why you think it's important to do?
I do not speak for the Common Council, and they will be the first to tell you that I do not speak for them. I believe that the reevaluation modernizes how we collect property taxes. We can set the levy in one way or another based on what those valuations are, of course. And some ways raise more revenue, some ways raise less revenue. But using 30-year-old data to create our second largest source of revenue into the city, our largest is sales tax, our second largest is property taxes, using 30-year-old data in many cases just isn't smart. A reevaluation improves fairness for all of our property taxpayers, so that people who have homes that have increased in value have that as a tool, are paying their fair share. Homes that have decreased in value or where the value has changed, that is being reflected as well. Businesses that have sprung up, new developments are being taxed appropriately as well. I think that comes down really to a question of fairness. Now, you can't make decisions for the future with outdated data. Our reevaluation just gives you the right data to then launch into a new decision set. Some people will pay higher taxes, yes, but those are people who probably live in properties or own properties that have increased in value. They should be paying higher taxes. That's fair. You'll see some people whose taxes are lowered as a result. That is also fair. What I think we should be doing is finding more ways to improve everyone's property values, make sure that we are a thoughtful, livable city and can really create neighborhoods that generate value for everyone. To the point of taxes, I am not eager to support a rate increase this year. I think it is a very tough time to be asking the people of the city of Syracuse, the ever dwindling number of property taxpayers we have, whether they're working class and middle class homeowners, whether they are small businesses. It is a tough time to be asking them to pay more in taxes. We are staring down the barrel of a possible recession. We are experiencing increases in the cost of living, and I think asking the minority of property owners in this city to subsidize some of our largest institutional neighbors is just simply not fair right now, and I think that we should be looking to make smart, thoughtful choices on revenue areas we can increase and ways we can use the tools at our disposal better before we go and ask the homeowners and small business people of the city of Syracuse for more money.
The drop in the property tax revenue, is that mainly because SU is continuing to buy up more properties?
So you have to look at, right now our levy is still at the highest of what it is, and our rate is going to increase. But we have to remember that only half of the properties in the city of Syracuse are taxable. Actually, less than half. It fluctuates. About 47% are taxable right now. About 53-54% are not. You see major institutional players, whether it's the state of New York owning ESF, Upstate, other properties, land acquisitions they're doing around the 81 project, which they are doing more and more of right now. You see Syracuse University buying more properties. I think that we really need to be thoughtful about asking our major institutional partners to do their fair share. They get tremendous amounts of public services. They use our water, which they do pay for our water as customers, but they use our water infrastructure that we have to go maintain. We plow the roads so their employees can get to work every day. We do all of this. They benefit from expensive public services without contributing to the public fisc, and I think we really need to seriously discuss how that impacts us for years to come. We're not alone in this, though. This needs to be a broader conversation than just Syracuse. I have had this conversation with elected officials in Ithaca, in Albany, in Providence, Rhode Island, in Berkeley, California. We are all people in college towns, in Philadelphia as well, people who have college towns or represent communities with these big institutional non-tax-paying neighbors wind up in this same situation, and we need help. We need regulatory relief, whether it's from the federal government or the state of New York, to balance out the cost of having some of these folks as neighbors.
Why put this report out now instead of after the budget? Are you going to have an impact on it? Do you want people to encourage people to go to the public hearing? Why now?
Yeah, I think it is. So this is the first time someone in my position has put out an analysis of the mayor's proposed budget. I think that it is helpful and impactful to be part of that conversation. I think that it is very important that we have independent analysis, independent oversight of the budget proposal and of the budget process. And I think this is a really good time to wade into that conversation and offer whatever thoughts and insight we have from my team in my office to really influence that conversation. Look, I've been around city government a long time. I know that the budget discussion often gets very technical, very lost in the weeds, and it's something that you kind of have to know going in to understand. What we're trying to do with this report is put something out that someone who lives in the city of Syracuse that wants to know how their government understand, review, and then hopefully engage with their government in a more thoughtful and enlightened manner. And I also hope that policymakers, whether it's in the administration or on the Common Council, I hope that policymakers are able to take this and review this and use this as a thoughtful tool, an extra set of eyes on the decisions they're trying to make right now too.
Please correct me if I'm miscategorizing, but it sounds like, on the one hand, you're explaining that relying to that percentage degree on what's in the reserves is not sustainable, not a great look for years to come. But you've also been talking on the flip side that now's not necessarily the time to ask residents to pay more taxes. So what do you say to the person who agrees with you on the taxes, but might point at the reserve balance of over $100 million and say, don't tax me, pull more from there?
Well, I think that is the hard work of governing, where sometimes you have to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to say no to people. And it is, we have a lot in reserves now, but if we do not address some of these structural costs facing the city of Syracuse going forward, we're not going to have that in reserves. Sure, you'll have it this year. You'll probably have that next year, but what about 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road from now? That will put you in a harder financial picture. I think that before we ask property taxpayers for that money, we should be looking at ways to increase revenue through user fees and other tools that we have at our disposal now. And we need to be looking at ways to create not only opportunities for more revenue, but opportunities for greater efficiency in the delivery of government services so that we can create savings going forward. So over time, what we take from reserves is just smaller, and we're not asking our taxpayers for dramatically more. I point you to the case study of Utica, which has had double-digit tax increases in recent years. I do not want to see that coming down the road 3, 4, 5 years from now. That would not be, I do not think that would be sustainable for the people who live and support the city of Syracuse. And that is not a future that I would be looking forward to. So we have to make sure that we are making reasonable choices. And look, with the idea of a tax increase, we are an outlier. Though cities, not other forms of government, but cities in particular, have had to make some tough choices because we are often the centers of tax-exempt property, major institutions, hospitals, universities, whatnot. They're in cities. That's how Utica got in that situation. That's why Albany has tremendous challenges. Buffalo has a large deficit that they're trying to deal with. Rochester has large tax-exempt institutions there as well. But that still makes us an outlier in government. We see Governor Hochul going across New York State promoting an affordability agenda. This contravenes that. And I would not want the city of Syracuse to be at a place where our tax increases jeopardize us getting revenue sources in the future from New York State. We're getting that support in the future. I think I was speaking with Senator Schumer earlier this week. This is National Affordability Week, an effort by congressional Democrats across the country to fight increasing cost of living, fight back on tariffs, to make things more affordable for people. I think there's this headwind of making life more affordable for people, and when we increase taxes, we make that harder for people. So I think we need to look at, I'm sorry, this is a very long answer to your question, Connor, but I think we need to find ways to really increase the user fees we ask of people without asking our taxpayers to foot the bill.
And you're really not addressing anything else. Proper sales tax, which is the most of the revenue in the budget, and it's flattened out and it could go down. So
It very much could, yes, and that is we didn't go too much into sales tax in this report, but that is a much larger issue. Our major sources of revenue are largely out of our control. Sales tax, we saw it during COVID, we saw it during the Great Recession, years ago. Sales tax can go away overnight, depending on economic conditions. State aid, we saw this in 2010 with Governor Cuomo. State aid can be cut or reduced or frozen overnight. Property taxes are one of the few things we can control, change. Right now it looks okay, but that could change with any number of economic wins that are wholly out of our control.
I think just with the ongoing committee meetings that are happening, Department of Water is on this afternoon. They've been in the spotlight a little bit to do with the lead testing and the water pressure. So with respect to their line items, is there anything in particular that you were looking at to support?
So it's important to note that the water department uses the water department is a self-generating fund. They're their own fund. They raise their own revenue. They also reimburse the city of Syracuse $2.8 million in this budget for services that the city has rendered. I have previously recommended better cost accounting so that we understand actually what services are being provided to the water fund as well as the sewer fund and other funds before we do those transfers rather than just using it as a flat number. And an example is if the water department needs a contract with an engineering firm, the law department here writes the contract, reviews it, the water fund reimburses us for those services. I think that we can do a better job of cost accounting on that because I think we need to be making sure that our water fund has the resources that it needs to do the important work of making sure everyone has clean, safe, potable water that's affordable. This budget also includes, I'll talk about DPW later, guys, don't you worry. This budget proposal also includes a 2% increase in water fees as well as a transfer from the water fund's reserve, which I've not seen before. I'm a little concerned about taking, if the city's reimbursing itself $2.8 million, but still taking $1 million out of the water fund's reserves. That's a little concerning to me long term. That may just be an anomaly this year, but I'm hoping that that is not something that continues, and that's also why I've recommended that the city do a better job explaining what every fund's reserves look like so that people can understand what they have sitting in the bank and what they have it there, what they're able to use. I am closely paying attention to how the EPA is faring under the current federal administration because I would be very concerned if suddenly money that has been pledged for lead water service replacement or other projects or water quality that they do that's so important could dry up or there be regulatory changes that I would be uncomfortable with. So I'm paying a lot of attention to what Lee Zeldin and the folks at the EPA are doing right now as well. Anyone else? All right, thank you all very much. Happy budget season.